Hi everyone. I'd like you to introduce you to MP Sriram, the founding partner at Aventus Partners, who's based out of Kochi. Sriram, can you please introduce yourself to my audience, please?
Sure, thanks. Hi everyone. I am Sriram. I work as a partner at Aventus Partners. Aventus is a consulting firm which has been in business for over 12 years now. I personally have been working for the last 25 years, out of which the last 12 have been with Aventus. At Aventus, I lead the performance, people, and change practice. And I am essentially responsible for ensuring that my clients, who basically organizations, are able to articulate and sustain changes as they strive to realize meaningful goals. I also work with co-founders of organizations to ensure that differences do not become conflicts and help them resolve their conflicts in case of an unfortunate event of their conflicts escalating. So these are essentially the two themes on which I focus on at Aventus. And I, along with my team, which includes my team members here in Kochi as well as in Delhi, we serve our clients around these dimensions. There are broadly three areas in which we intervene, and we intervene depending upon the needs of the specific context. So one, we ensure that there is clarity among the key people in the organization in terms of their strategy, clarity in terms of the goals, in terms of the culture that they're trying to build, as well as in terms of solutions to some of those organizational and business challenges that they're grappling with. The second area in which we intervene is in terms of aligning their key people to the strategy, aligning their people to their goals as well as the culture that they're trying to build, essentially through changes in the way that they are organized. It could be changes in terms of the organization structure. It could be changes in terms of their role responsibilities, decision authorities, in terms of the way performance expectations are set. It could be in terms of reward mechanisms. So this is the second part in which we intervene. And the third way in which we intervene is that we enable specific individuals within that organization understand what it takes to deliver high performance within their context and help them make those necessary changes to deliver on that high performance. So this is broadly what we do. And over the period of the last 12 years, our range of clients have expanded from large private and public sector corporations to high growth emerging companies, typically companies between the 500 to the 1,000 crore kind of range, which have a proven business model, but which are looking to scale up, right, and capitalize on their potential. We also have been of significant value to medium and small enterprises in the last couple of years in their efforts at growing. And clients have included organizations in the technology space, in the financial services space, as well as in the hospitality and the healthcare verticals. So this is essentially what we do. And clients come to us when they are either unable to realize their goals or trying to bridge the gap between their performance and their potential. So this broadly is what we do at Aventus Partners, specifically within the people performance and change practice that I lead.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sriram. So you mentioned about co-founders in your introduction just now. So my first question is this: how can one effectively work with co-founders?
Okay. So let me try and answer that from two perspectives.
Okay.
One is, let me use some of my personal experiences because there are three of us who co-founded Aventus Partners. And in some way, it's a long distance relationship because two of them are based in Delhi and I'm personally based in Kochi. I will also use some of the learnings that I have gathered from various client contexts.
That would be perfect.
Wonderful. So the way I see it is that there are going to be differences between co-founders. We are all different human beings. Right? There are differences among us in two ways. We are different in terms of our worldviews. We are also different in terms of our personalities. The earlier we are able to understand and recognize these differences, the better for us, right? And this has to be a conscious effort. The more we are able to understand our worldviews, the more we are able to understand the worldviews of our partners, as well as the way we are able to understand our own personality differences makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
A couple of things happens in this process as you try and do this. One, you start becoming far more appreciative about the perspectives of the other. Two, you also know what are the things on which you need to be flexible about and what are the things on which you need to be inflexible about. And this actually sets the ground for a successful relationship to blossom, right? Having said that, there are various triggers, right, which could arise during the lifetime of an organization, right, in terms of the relationship between the co-founders. And I'm consciously calling them triggers because these are triggers which could actually spark off a conflict between the co-owners, right? Therefore, being sensitive to some of these triggers is extremely important. Now, some of the triggers that I have realized, right, are triggers which are highly personal to individuals, right? So it could be as the organization grows, our role responsibilities start changing, right? It's possible that some people start pulling in more weight than the others, right? It could be that there is one person who's actually bringing in the customers and the others are managing the back end of the organization. And there could be strains that could arise in that relationship because of the same, because the person who is bringing in the customers, the person who's bringing in the revenue, many a time might start believing that he or she is possibly getting the wrong side of the stick, because in most partnerships, typically all the rewards are equally shared between the co-owners, right? Therefore, being cognizant to some of these triggers is extremely important in the lifetime of the organization. Right. Now, I will just talk about how do we address some of these in a bit, but triggers is one thing, is the second thing that you need to be conscious about as a co-founder. Mm-hmm. The next thing that is important for you to recognize is that you be conscious of some of the inflection points that come in our journey, right? Now, I'm consciously using the word inflection point because in our journeys, it's possible that one partner decides to drop out. We decide to maybe actually induct a new partner into the organization, right? It's possible that we open a new location, a new geography. These are all potential inflection points that could happen in our lifetime as an organization, especially in our journey between our partners, right? And therefore, planning and preparing for these becomes extremely important. So my learning and therefore my advice to people who venture down this path is that you need to put in some basic processes in place, right? Do not take anything for granted. Even if you are a small organization, maybe of 5 people, 10 people, you have a couple of partners, you have more than 2 partners, right? Laying down the clear ground rules in terms of saying who's going to be doing what, right? What is the decision making?
Sriram, is it enough that the co-founders talk to them about each other? I mean, like in a vocal way, or do you think it needs to be documented and it needs to be there needs to be some formal contract signed in between them? What do you recommend?
Wonderful. Thanks for raising that. So I think there are 2 parts to the process, right? One is this process of constant dialogue. One is this process of ensuring that there is constant communication between the co-founders, right? And I'm consciously stressing on communication because I don't think the importance of that can ever be undervalued. Right? Just to give you a small example, let's say there would be one co-founder who's responsible for overseeing the financials of the organization. Right. While the books of accounts of the organization theoretically are open to all the co-founders, right? There could be many a time, especially during periods when you're going through a rough patch, where the other co-founders might start subconsciously believing or start getting a little restless in terms of the way money is being spent in the organization, but still not be comfortable enough to come forward and talk, right, to their co-founders in terms of saying, hey, what the hell is really happening? So I would say having clearly defined formal channels of communication becomes extremely important, right? So whether it's scheduling a weekly formal call, right, whether it is having those periodic quarterly retreats wherein you get quality time to spend with each other so that you understand each other as individuals, you can talk about some of those thorny issues, becomes extremely important. That's one part of the equation. Right. The other part of the equation is in terms of documenting this, right? Again, that's something that is extremely critical because what typically happens in many of these relationships is you start off on a good note, right? So you assume that things are going to remain the way they are going to remain going forward. And I will take an example to illustrate this for you. So around 7 years back, there were a couple of co-founders of a fairly successful financial services organization who had reached out to me for help, right? And they had started out as a very small entity 7 years back, and the organization had grown in size and scale over a period of 7 years. And as happens in most of these cases, there was no formal written agreement between the 2 of them, to the extent that there's no formal written agreement even in terms of who holds what kind of shareholding in the organization, right? And they reached a point of time when one co-owner believed that he was actually pulling the entire ship forward, and the other co-owner was a silent partner, and he wanted to dissolve the relationship, but wanted to dissolve the relationship in a manner in which it is fair to both the parties, right? Now they reached out to me because they wanted my help and intervention in terms of ensuring that the resolution happens in a fair manner. But the reason I'm sharing this example is because this underlines the need for documenting things. And what do you document? Don't take anything for granted would be my first piece of advice, right? Everything needs to be in black and white. So whether it is in terms of the percentage of shareholding that you're going to have in the enterprise, right? What kind of remuneration?
Even for that matter, role descriptions, right? Like each partner,
most certainly,
what functions are they going to perform at the company, and how do we measure the progress? All these things are very important to be documented, isn't it?
Most certainly. So every single process and system that you typically want to have as far as your employees are concerned, right? It's imperative that you have those systems and processes in place between the co-founders, right? So whether it is right from ensuring that you have the financials in place, agreement in place in terms of saying who brings in what kind of equity into the organization, right? Who's going to bring in the hard cash? Who is going to bring in sweat equity? Therefore, in terms of the books of accounts of the organization, what is the kind of shareholding that each one is going to have? What are going to be the roles and responsibilities of each one? Right? How does this mesh in with the overall business plan of the organization? Are there going to be any gaps in terms of the functional responsibilities? Right? What is going to be the fixed pay that each one of us is going to draw? What is going to be the performance-based pay? What are going to be the metrics that are going to be used to determine this, right? All this becomes extremely important. Also important would be in terms of saying what are the purposes that we are going to be eligible for? What are the kind of cash withdrawals that we are eligible for from the organization?
Right.
What is the kind of role that we have in the decision-making process within the organization? In the sense, who is going to be responsible for hiring employees? Right? Who is going to be responsible for making purchases, right? What decisions need to be collective decisions? What decisions can be left to individuals? Discussing these things, documenting these things become extremely imperative. I'm just sharing with you some of these tips to give you a flavor, right? Okay. And while if the co-owners can do this between themselves, nothing like it, right? But I think there is no harm in reaching out to a professional who could help them out in terms of defining these boundaries so that is clearly laid out. And I think the third thing, which sometimes is completely missed out in this process, is defining the values and the culture of that organization. Now, I think this is extreme. So values. Okay. So I'm going to make a distinction between the vision and the values here. Right? Okay. My learning has been that the vision evolves over a period of time. Right? Very rarely do you have an organization wherein you have the co-founders who are able to clearly articulate a vision on day one, and it's the same vision that they hold on to 10 years down the line. Right? My learning has been that the vision would evolve over a period of time, and that's a process. Absolutely. So when I'm making a distinction between vision and values and the culture here, I'm consciously making a distinction. Okay. Values and culture are what is going to be the fundamental framework of the organization. And the way I have learned to distinguish them is that you have three kinds of values. You have what I would call as a core values, which are inviolable, right? So anyone who violates these core values does not have a place anymore in the organization. Correct. Then you have what I would call as the service delivery values, which ensure that you are able to deliver whatever you're promising to deliver. And third would be your growth values, which will essentially drive the organization. So these are some of the things that I would say you need to clearly document and put in place, right? And the process can take its time. I'm not saying this needs to be done within the first 15 days of the organization, but there are certain things that you need to agree on at the outset, and there are certain things that can evolve over a period of time.
Perfect. This is excellent. This is great information. I think just for the defining culture aspect of it, I think we can go on, talk about it for at least 30 minutes, especially only on the culture building part of it. Because
sure. Yeah.
What I've seen in my journey so far has been this. For the first 5 years, 6 years of my business, I never had to even think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, because we were still in the early stages and we were still finding our core strengths and things. It didn't occur to me that but at least these days when people start the startups. I think people are more aware of all these before, than a few years ago.
Sure, sure.
That's great information. Like, I think we also went and touched upon a few other very important points when you spoke about co-founders.